Unbelievable. How one janitor's incredible skills transformed a $1 million crisis in just minutes. James stood just outside the laboratory, the faint hum of cutting-edge machinery competing with the rising tide of chaos within. He clutched his mop like a shield, masked in the shadows of his janitorial blues. Anxiety spiked through the air as he watched Dr. Morales pace in his corner office filled with trophies of academic prestige. A $1 million experiment teetered on the edge of disaster, under the watchful eyes of trustees ready to threaten with consequence. Panic twisted in the lab, a cacophony of desperation mixing with the sterile smell of chemicals. James's heart raced, not just from the hustle around him, but from the memories that surfaced. Once he had aspired to be an engineer, an innovator in a world where possibilities seemed endless. But life had rewritten his script, the tales of dreams fading like distant stars. Each mop stroke over polished floors felt like resigning his intellect, dragging him deeper into the weight of regret and self-doubt. He was merely a janitor now, carefully hidden from the brilliance that surrounded him, too unworthy to step in when something went horribly wrong. As cries of alarm burst through muffled walls, a tug of longing pulled at him. He had soaked up years of scientific jargon from overheard conversations, a silent observer to a world that had long since turned its back on him. Could he really do anything to help? The ingrained belief that he belonged in the shadows gripped him. Should he stay silent, mop in hand, watching as the clock ticked down? Or risk crossing an imagined boundary? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The urgent whispers ignited a flicker in James, a spark of inspiration. Images flooded his mind, tinkering in his garage, turning broken radios into makeshift wonders. The innovation he had buried beneath doubt clawed its way back to the surface, begging for release amidst the frenzy. He felt the pressure jarring his gut, but stilled it with determination. Could he challenge the hierarchy, join forces with the lab techs and maintenance crew? The weight of self-judgment pressed on him, urging him to remain invisible, yet the ticking clock screamed for action. James tightened his grip on the mop. Ideas began to swirl as he wrapped his mind around solutions, those faint echoes of creativity flickering like a faulty bulb. He hesitated, fear whispering the old tales of inadequacy and insignificance. But desperation prosecuted his heart harder, driving him closer to the precipice of action. Each second felt like an eternity as the lab filled with swirling tension, suffocating any remnants of confidence he clung to. Would Dr. Morales listen to him, a mere janitor with no accolades or degrees to show? The magnitude of what lay before him loomed like a deep chasm, pulling him closer to the edge. His throat tightened. The moment James chose to step across that invisible line, facing the unknown, he could lose everything, or find the breakthrough he'd craved his whole life. As the crisis reached its zenith, time stretched like taffy, each heartbeat an agonizing reminder of who he was versus who he could become. The stakes had never felt higher, and James stood poised to embrace the outcome, anxious for the resolution that lurked just beyond his reach. With a deep breath, James took a step forward, clearing his throat amidst the chaos that surrounded him. The sound of machinery screeched and clattered, moments away from catastrophic failure. Adrenaline surged. He felt the familiar, sickening pull of fear, but under it lay something more powerful: determination. Enough was enough. He would no longer be just a passive observer. "Dr. Morales!" he shouted, channeling every ounce of courage into his voice. It cut through the clamor like a knife, catching the doctor's attention as he spun around. Confusion etched across his furrowed brow. In that brief moment, James's heart pounded in his ears, drowning out doubts that hissed for him to step back. "What do you want?" Dr. Morales snapped, panic still flickering in his eyes. "I can help," James said, more assertively than he expected. "I've been listening for years. If I had a chance to explain a few ideas. A tense silence enveloped the space. In his mind, James catalogued every unassuming tool, every scrap of knowledge he had tucked away in the recesses of his mind. The experiments he had overheard, the diagrams he had glimpsed when cleaning the break areas, suddenly coalesced into a plan. The pressure building in his chest began to transform as he propelled his thoughts toward action. "Are you serious? You?" Dr. Morales's incredulity echoed in the room, a mix of disdain and disbelief. For the first time, James didn't flinch. Memories of forgotten dreams ignited resolve within him. "I know things," he pressed on, his voice steadier. "Leave the technical jargon aside for a moment. I'm asking you to trust me. There's a way to fix it," he insisted. Dr. Morales scrutinized him, and the room held its breath. He turned to his team and hissed an instruction, but it was clear the calm, unbothered authority he usually wielded was fraying. "What do you have in mind?" he finally asked, not without an edge of skepticism. James took a step forward, reassured by the moment of curiosity, nudging aside disdain. "The fluid flow regulator. It's malfunctioning because of a pressure buildup. If we reverse engineer the emergency release protocol, we could vent it safely without blowing the system." The words flowed forth, information layered in confidence as he began sketching a rudimentary diagram on the back of an old scientific memo taped to the wall. He looked up, eyes shining with fervor. "I know I may not have the credentials, but I've seen similar systems work, many times." The room bristled with disbelief, but something shifted. Behind his growing uncertainty, Dr. Morales's gaze flickered with a hint of intrigue. The technicians murmured amongst themselves, glancing between James and their boss, weighing their collective opinions. I need proof," the doctor finally stated, crossing his arms rigidly, still skeptical, but no longer entirely dismissive. "Let me show you," James urged, emboldened by the lack of immediate dismissal. "I can guide you through. Just give me a chance to prove I'm right." In that charged atmosphere, James felt an unshakable sense of purpose swell within him, eclipsing every whisper of doubt. The stakes had been escalated to monumental heights, but for the first time in years, he was not just a janitor. He was proving he could be the architect of his own story, not simply an afterthought. As the team reluctantly gathered around him, it dawned on James that this was not just a chance to save a project, it was a catalyst for his own rebirth. The boundaries of his past began to dissolve. Confidence crept into every corner of his being. He understood that by crashing through the confines of identity, he could redefine not just his professional life, but also the essence of who he was. But he knew this was only the beginning. As they started to implement his plan, the uncertainty loomed larger, and a troubling thought seeped into his mind. If it failed, what would it mean for him? Would he become yet another name lost in a sea of fabrications, a reminder of aspirations crumbled? As they edged closer to execution, the escalating situation shimmered with potential and danger. It would either forge his path forward or bury him in their belief that he was nothing more than the janitor. The moment had arrived to forge his destiny, and he stood at the precipice of change, teetering between hope and despair, ready to dive into the unknown outcome. With a deep breath, James set his jaw, focusing entirely on the chaotic surroundings. The technicians had gathered, their skepticism still lingering, but he felt a shift, a faint glimmer of belief igniting among them. It wasn't just their project on the line. This was his chance to demonstrate not only what he could do, but who he truly was. "All right, everyone," James called, forcing a sense of control into his voice. "Let's outline the process step by step. The first thing we need to check is the current pressure reading on the flow regulator." A technician moved to comply, his brow knit tightly in concentration. James noted how the man's fingers danced nervously over the controls. It was a reflection of the mounting pressure they all felt. He inhaled deeply, readying himself to guide them further. "Once we verify the pressure levels, we'll need to devise a strategy to vent the excess fluid without triggering a complete shutdown. It's crucial to manage the flow. Otherwise, we could escalate the situation," he explained, drawing on knowledge he had assimilated over years of observation. Dr. Morales stood to the side, arms crossed, a frown etched unwaveringly on his face. James met his gaze, searching for any hint of encouragement. Instead, he was met with a hardened resolve. The moment felt monumental, charged with potential. Not just to save the project, but to reclaim his identity from the constraints of his past. As the team busied themselves with instruments and pressure gauges, James quickly sketched out a new diagram, this time on the large whiteboard commandeered from a neighboring lab. He pointed out flow directions and emergency shut-off valves, articulating concepts he had unconsciously absorbed over the years. "See this?" He gestured with intensity. "The emergency release valve is set to activate under perfect conditions, but in our case it needs a manual trigger. We can bypass the automatic shut-off and control the system manually, if we work together. It's about taming the beast rather than unleashing it." Dr. Morales's arm shifted, a subtle indication that maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to rethink his initial judgment. James's heart raced. This realization fueled him to push forward with even greater fervor. "Let's move quickly," he urged, growing hyper-focused, buoyed by an unexpected surge of adrenaline. "We can't let doubt linger anymore. If this doesn't work, we risk irreversible damage. But if we listen, we'll find a solution." While the technicians exchanged uncertain glances, responding to his urgency, he decided then that he would no longer hide behind humility. He was evolving. He referred to his own knowledge explicitly, layering his confidence in authority. "I've learned from the best. Just because my experience isn't counted in formal accolades doesn't mean I'm not capable of contributing something vital." The team operated under his guidance, tensions ebbing slightly as they focused on the task at hand. They ran tests, made adjustments, and with each small success, the air began to shift from disbelief to cautious optimism. But as the pressure gauge flickered dangerously near red, a creeping doubt slithered back into James's thoughts. What if the moment of truth revealed him as a fraud? What if all his careful planning turned to ash in mere minutes? He pushed the thoughts aside with fierce determination. No room for hesitation. It was a choice to engage or retreat into the shadows he had long inhabited. "Prepare to engage manual override," he commanded, voice cutting through the low hum of anxiety encircling them. Every eye in the room darted to him, the unspoken weight of hope burdening their shoulders, and he finally felt the coherent flicker of unity. As they reached for the controls, the machine rumbled ominously, and the reality of their situation crashed down like a wave. It was now or never. With a calculated presence of mind, James took a deep breath and prepared for the outcome. This was his moment, the culmination of years spent in the background. The flick of a switch would change everything, redefining who he could be. Would he shatter the ceiling obscuring his potential, or would he be left shattered among the remnants of failure? The answer loomed just out of reach, yet he steeled himself, locking eyes with Dr. Morales, who stood on the precipice of judgment, ready to decide if this janitor would remain a mere bystander or step into the light of a newfound identity. As the pressure climbed, uncertainty rippled in the air, and with it, a thrilling tension hung heavily. James braced himself for what lay ahead. This was not just a test of engineering, it was a test of self. One that demanded he confront the ultimate question. Who was he really? And just as he felt the final surge of resolve, an alarm blared, cutting through the air like a cold dagger, sending shockwaves through the room. The moment had arrived to face the unknown. The alarm screamed through the control room, jarring every technician from their focused tasks. The sound was relentless, an unforgiving reminder that time was not on their side. James felt the intensity of the moment bear down on him, shifting the atmosphere from tentative confidence to sheer urgency. The pressure gauge was indicating a rapid rise that threatened to breach safety limits. With heart pounding, he surveyed the frantic scene. "Stay focused!" he barked, his voice slicing through the chaos. It was a reminder that panic would not serve them. He could see that the technicians, previously gripped by uncertainty, were now looking to him, their expression bordering on desperation. They needed leadership, someone to anchor them through the storm. In that instant, James internalized the weight of ownership. This was not merely the project's success at stake. It was his chance to redefine his narrative. He could either dissolve into the background or rise to meet the moment. With a steadying breath, he recalled his training, the countless hours spent fixing machinery in silence, the observations made during late-night shifts, and the technical manuals devoured during moments of quiet. That knowledge, once a hidden part of him, surged forward, merging seamlessly with his resolve. "We've got one chance," he began, meeting the eyes of each technician with unwavering intensity. "We're going to engage the manual controls and vent the excess pressure. I need you all to trust me." Silence settled like a blanket. Hesitation hung in the air, the weight of unspoken doubts tangible. Dr. Morales's frown deepened, disappointment and skepticism mingling in his expression. It stung, but it also ignited a fierce determination within James. He wasn't just fighting for acceptance anymore. He was fighting for his identity. "Mark," he called to the technician manning the controls, "you handle the pressure release. Focus on the gauge and keep me updated." "Got it." Mark nodded, but James could see the tightness in his shoulders. "Lucy, double-check the emergency release valve settings," he instructed, his voice firm. "If we're going to do this, we need to be meticulous." The energy in the room began to pulse with newly found purpose. Each technician was driven by a singular goal, salvaging not just the system but their faith in themselves and each other. "All right, on my count," James announced, his voice crystal clear despite the clamor around him. 3, 2, 1, engage. The manual controls clicked violently, and the machine roared beneath them, a visceral response to their synchronized action. The pressure gauge's needle crept dangerously close to the red zone, quivering like a creature ready to break free from its confines. An electric tension crackled in the air, feeding James's resolve. In this moment, facing the monstrous machinery that seemed to breathe chaos, he felt a burgeoning power within him. Each pulse of the system resonated with the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He was not a mere janitor, he was a vital component, an architect of potential who could command respect through action. The initial rush of operation gave way to the slow, agonizing wait for the results. As the numbers began to stabilize, the atmosphere shifted further. Hope replaced despair. Uncertainty succumbed to clarity. For the first time, all eyes rested on James. Not with skepticism, but with reverence. "Pressure's holding steady," Mark reported, his voice tinted with disbelief but also gratitude. James met Dr. Morales's gaze again, daring to hold it. The scientist's frown had not fully dissipated, but understanding flickered behind his eyes now. "I'll take that," James replied, a reluctant smile breaking across his face. In this small victory, he felt his own light begin to flicker, powerful, undeniable. But just as the tension began to ease, an unexpected sound caught everyone off guard. A metallic groan reverberated ominously, followed by a series of alarms blaring anew, bringing them back to the edge of chaos. "Not yet," James murmured to himself, steeling against the fear that threatened to invade his hard-won confidence. He took a deep breath, preparing to dive back into the fray. The fight was not over. This crisis would demand everything from him, and he was ready to rise once again. The true test loomed ahead. Would he continue to evolve under the pressure, or would the shadows of doubt pull him back into darkness? The uncertainty tightened its grip around him, setting the stage for a confrontation that would define not just the project, but the very core of who he had become. Desperation clawed at the edges of James's mind as the alarms blared with renewed ferocity, the sound echoing like an unwelcome specter threatening to engulf his newfound confidence. He could feel the weight of the team's collective anxiety pressing down, but he steeled himself against it. This was his moment to not only salvage the project but to further uncover the leader developing within him. "Mark, take stock of the pressure fluctuations," he shouted over the cacophony. "Lucy, I need the safety specs on the coolant system, now." His decisiveness flowed from an understanding that their success hinged not only on technical expertise, but on unwavering resolve. James moved purposefully, positioning himself at the helm of the chaotic control panel. He felt the eyes of his team as they worked, each glance filled with a blend of hope and trepidation, driving him to overcome the tremors of self-doubt. The metallic sounds reverberating around him were no longer ominous. They were a clarion call, an invitation to adapt and execute. As he peered over the control dials, his thoughts spiraled deeper into the complexity of the machinery before him. The unwieldy buttons and levers that once felt intimidating now appeared as an intricate puzzle. He recalled the hours spent observing, absorbing, and learning how each element interacted, a hidden reservoir of knowledge waiting to be unleashed. No longer was he merely a janitor. He was a burgeoning technician ready to command the system's intricacies. "Lucy, if the coolant levels aren't stabilized, we need to divert the flow before the pressure hits critical." The command was instinctual. He didn't wait for hesitation or second-guessing. Instead, he chose decisive action, carving clarity from chaos. He realized that he was not alone in this fight. The entire team was looking to him, and their faith tethered him to purpose. Mark's brow furrowed, focus sharpening. "I see a small dip in coolant pressure, but it's manageable." "Divert it, now," James responded, his voice carrying an assuredness he hadn't fully accepted until this very moment. As the technicians moved with newfound urgency, he could feel the electrifying synergy building. Their confidence blossomed under his leadership. He was setting a standard not only for his capability, but for what they could accomplish as a team. Each successful move paralleled a growing sense of this new identity he was forming, one anchored in perseverance and skill. But just when things began to stabilize, the alarms blared again, this time accompanied by more unnerving vibrations from the machinery. The needle on the pressure gauge twitched aggressively, a beast at the edge of breaking free. Panic threatened to resurface in his colleagues as their eyes widened in disbelief. James felt the cold grip of anxiety creep up his spine, but he shook it off. "Stay calm. Listen." His voice rang out like a lifeline. "It's time to activate the bypass valve. Everyone, on 3. The words spilled from him with a fervor that surprised even himself. This was not just a call to action. It was a moment of truth, a shared responsibility he had fostered. As they prepared for the next maneuver, James gazed into the eyes of his peers, seeing their trust reflected back at him. They stood on the precipice of either triumph or calamity, and he knew there was no turning back. The bypass valve would either save them or lead to irrevocable failure of the entire system. He could feel the choices he'd made leading him to this cliff, each step echoing with the weight of expectations. Could he sustain this momentum? "Together, on 3, he commanded, aware that each heartbeat was synchronized with the machine's frantic rhythm. 3, 2, 1, activate. The control panel trembled under his touch as he executed the command, the outcome uncertain. In that instant, he recognized that he was evolving, not just in skill, but in spirit. The confrontation with fear and doubt was inescapable. Would this bold maneuver redeem them, or would it push him further into the depths of uncertainty? Behind the buzz of machinery and roaring alarms lay the essence of his newfound identity, waiting to either shatter or solidify under pressure. The moment of reckoning had finally arrived. The hydraulic hiss filled the air as the bypass valve opened, the system exerting its force with an audible gasp. James's heart raced, pounding against the confines of his chest as he monitored the pressure gauge, hoping for a sign of stabilization. The needle teetered, wavering precariously, a reflection of his own fragile confidence. "Pressure's dropping," Lucy announced breathlessly, her voice infused with an urgency that mirrored James's mounting anticipation. He couldn't breathe. It felt as though the machine and his own being were interconnected. Each flicker of the dials mirrored his internal struggle. Would this choice lead to victory or disaster? "Keep monitoring. Stay vigilant," he urged, channeling his uncertainty into a fierce determination. He felt the weight of expectation hanging over him, yet he refused to let the burden crush him. A sense of responsibility anchored him, wrapping around his very essence, filling the gaps where fear threatened to invade. As the initial chaos seemed to give way to a fragile calm, James took a moment to breathe deeply. Calm, clarity, command. It was a brief interlude, the briefest of escapes from the relentless forward thrust of crisis. He looked around, gauging the moods of his teammates. Fear had begun to dissipate, replaced by cautious optimism. It was a shift he wanted to solidify. They were no longer simply responding to panic. They were building a foundation of trust and collaboration. Mark, recap our next steps. We need a plan if the pressure fluctuates again, he instructed, his voice steady and strong. Mark nodded, visibly steadied by James's conviction. If it climbs past normal levels again, we can throttle back on the intake valves, he replied, his focus sharpening, realizing the pivotal role he played in this cohesive unit. James absorbed Mark's words, mentally reinforcing what they now shared. In moments of crisis, clear communication was as crucial as technical expertise. This realization swung open doors within him he didn't know were locked. Each conversation solidified his competence. He was not merely a cog in the wheel, but a dynamic force. I want to recalibrate the system monitoring. We need to be ahead of the curve, he declared, his mind racing ahead with strategies. They had come too far to risk losing control again. The whir of machinery was slowly supplanted by the sounds of collaboration. He thrived on the rhythm as team members echoed his commands, mirroring his determination. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing levels of expertise across the team that he had never recognized before. There was a skillfulness in their movements that he had underestimated. Just when the air began to feel breathable, a shrill alarm pierced through once more, sending an electric shock of dread through the room. James's stomach dropped. Their fragile equilibrium was under assault. This was his moment to discover what he was made of. Could he lead them through this tempest once again? Evaluate and execute. He steadied his breath and thought quickly. What had he learned from prior mistakes? Mark and Lucy, check the emergency protocols. Everyone else, I want eyes on the pressure readings and the mechanical responses. Let's stay ahead of this. The control panel flickered ominously as his command reverberated through the team. It ignited a pulse of energy, a willingness to follow him into the murky waters of uncertainty. His heart raced not from fear, but from the invigorating thrill of leadership. Each decision felt like a step further into his unfolding identity. This wasn't just a crisis, it was a proving ground. Yet lurking beneath the surface of his burgeoning confidence was the glimmer of doubt. How many times could he rise to the occasion before calamity struck? The urgency pulsed through his veins alongside the unease, intermingling strangely. The alarms became a backdrop to his internal dialogue, a loud reminder that salvation and disaster danced hand in hand. Did he truly have what it takes to lead them through? The pressure gauge hovered on the brink, its needle a constant reminder that the slightest miscalculation could mean everything. With each click of the buttons beneath his fingertips, James wondered if his transformation would indeed hold, whether he would emerge as a beacon or simply a broken cog in this unforgiving machinery. As the team prepared for the next maneuver, he pondered just how far he still had to travel on this winding path of self-discovery. And so, as the alarms reached a fever pitch, the moment for clarity arrived. How could he harness this chaos to cultivate not just survival, but unfathomable growth? The question burned within him as the pressure mounted. Was this the moment his true potential would finally surface? The alarms became a cacophony, resonating through James's core like a thunderstorm. He sensed the energy in the room shift, a collective inhale as they braced themselves for his cues. Each frantic beep seemed to echo his own spiraling thoughts. Would the pressure bubble over, jeopardizing everything they had worked for? Or could they navigate the storm to emerge unscathed? Focus on the data, he reminded himself, drowning out the noise. His mind raced back through the events he had just steered them through. Clear instructions had brought a sense of order amidst the chaos. This was not just mechanical warfare, it was human resilience at play. The clock was ticking, and each moment was a chance to reinforce that resilience within himself and his team. Lucy, prioritize our monitoring system, he called out, forcing her attention back to the panel she had managed expertly. We need visual data to interpret the pressure spikes. She nodded, refocusing, and James felt a pang of pride. They were building an interdependence that felt stronger than any weight of uncertainty. Then a pang of doubt shot through him. Was he truly as capable as he felt? What if he led them astray? He could no longer afford to hesitate. If he faltered now, everything would collapse like a house of cards. Yet perhaps this moment was only the beginning, a pivotal crossroad where uncertainty could unfold into growth. Mark! he barked, interrupting his fraying thoughts. "Get the backup systems ready, just in case we need to enact emergency protocols." Each syllable delivered with purpose solidified a foundation of his growing confidence. He was not here by chance. He belonged here, amid the tempest, ready to guide them toward clarity. He felt the adrenaline surge through his veins, but tempered it with careful thought. James was deriving strength from the chaos, transforming anxiety into actionable insights. It was here in the eye of the storm that he could channel the fear, molding it into something productive. Trust had seeped into the atmosphere. Morale was rising even as alarms screamed in dissent. The control panel flickered. More than a tool, it was now a lifeline. "We've prepared for this," he whispered to himself, gripping the edge of the desk. "None of us were meant to fail today." Then, just as he prepared his next command, a series of notifications lit up the screen, flashing warnings he had feared but hoped to avoid. His heart sank. They were venturing into uncharted territory, and clarity was slipping away. Feeling the dawning pressure of time, he had an epiphany. He needed to utilize the very uncertainty around them. The chaos itself might offer answers he hadn't anticipated. Alarms are not just warnings, they're indicators of opportunity, he realized. They point us toward what's unaccounted for. Taking a deep breath, he called out, "Let's analyze the readings. Are the fluctuations consistent? We need to dig deeper into what's driving this." He noticed the slight hesitance in their movements, but quickly reminded himself of the foundation of trust they had built. "We can work together on this." The team shifted gears, and a palpable energy coalesced as each member concentrated, examining the data beyond surface panic. It was as if James had triggered a spark, igniting their hidden potential to thrive amid adversity. But just as collaboration flourished, the alarm stuttered, a brief silence that felt eerie and foreboding. Everyone exchanged a glance, an unspoken question hanging in the air. Had they stabilized, or was this deceptive calm just a precursor to a bigger disaster? Step by step, they analyzed the data, dissecting the machinery's behavior as it quelled back into a semblance of order. Whatever the outcome, James could feel a new resolve forming within him, pushing him to delve deeper into not only the mechanics around him but into the capabilities he hadn't fully acknowledged in himself. As the readings shifted once more, brewing storms of uncertainty in the tension-laden air, one question churned through his mind. What if the real crisis revealed not just the weaknesses of their systems, but the untapped strengths within himself? He steadied himself, preparing to confront whatever came next. The real test of capacity loomed ahead, shrouded in uncertainty, but he could sense the shift in his own narrative, and no matter how turbulent the waters, it was time for him to embrace the brunt of this pivotal moment. What lay ahead would demand everything he had to offer, and James felt a burgeoning belief within him. Tomorrow would bring clarity, but today, the transformation had only just begun. Would this be his turning point into the leader he aspired to be? The still air in the room thickened, the silence stretching into an agonizing pause that heightened James's awareness of each heartbeat. He could feel the scrutiny of his team's eyes, each gaze an unspoken challenge urging him to rise to the occasion. The screens before him flickered erratically, numbers flowing like errant rivers that spoke only of confusion. Stay focused, he thought, forcing clarity into the swirling chaos. He recognized his role as both navigator and anchor. His confidence was the beacon guiding them into the unknown. As he mentally recalibrated, he surveyed the data before him. Wild fluctuations, but something felt familiar. Patterns often revealed themselves under pressure, and he needed to put his theory to the test. "Mark, if we can stabilize the pressure on the north sector, we might buy ourselves more time," he suggested, his voice steady despite the tension coiling within. The clatter of fingers against keyboards surged like a percussive heartbeat resonating within the space. He watched as Mark rapidly input commands, resistance flaring up with electric energy as the team rallied. "Lucy, analyze the last hour's trends. We need to connect the dots," he urged, his mind racing with fragments of strategies that might work, threading their capabilities with urgency. James meticulously dissected the data, each piece feeding into the broader narrative of their situation. He remembered his training, the myriad of decisions from previous drills piecing together now, fusing with instinct to form a clear path forward. The alarms, still screeching, felt less like adversaries and more like heralds of potential. Tragedy could teach them resilience if they leaned into it. Okay, team, let's build a multi-layered risk assessment based on the spikes. I see a correlation forming, he declared, the realization sparking a wave of adrenaline. They were not merely reacting, they were analyzing, synthesizing, shaping the unfolding drama into strategic moves. The shockwave of collective intelligence surged through him. They were transcending panic. As the minutes ticked by, James's breath steadied. For the first time since the alarms blared, he felt a flicker of control ignite within. The uncertainty undulated like a wave, and each time it rose, he sidestepped it, converting its momentum into opportunity. His thoughts crystallized. Complexity could yield clarity, and fear could morph into focus. Yet, even as he led the charge, an undercurrent of fear gnawed at him. He had sensed that this pressure could unravel them. But what if the outside threat spiraled beyond their control? Should he prepare for blame or forge the path of accountability? Would the fallout reflect his leadership or their collective failure? Time's against us, he murmured, shaking off the doubt as fresh alerts flickered across the panels. New anomalies popped into view, a digital facsimile of the storm swirling around them. Keep your eyes sharp, another warning blared, and instinctively, James pivoted to the team, igniting resolve. We've seen setbacks before. Remember the last drill? We improvised and recalibrated. This is just another test of our adaptability. The weight of his words settled in, palpable. The trust they had built could outweigh even the gravest of errors. He felt their renewed energy fill the room, a collective heartbeat rising against the ticking clock. But then a specific reading caught his eye. A spike that wasn't merely mechanical, but hinted at something unanticipated. The sensation of an impending revelation settled into focus, an idea descending upon him like a flash of lightning. What if their very actions could trigger something greater than recovery? What if they could redefine not only their outcomes but their entire approach? Let's pivot, he commanded suddenly, surprising even himself. This could be the breakthrough. They had a chance to transform the situation to their advantage. The team exchanged quick glances, uncertainty tempered by the embers of his defiance. Execute a full-spectrum modification, he directed, his heart racing with anticipation. We'll adjust our protocols, gather fresh data, and throw everything into this. We can harness the chaos. As the team fell into action, James felt the storm within himself gradually quiet. They were turning panic into possibility, and just outside the tumult, he sensed the precipice of his evolution as a leader. But alongside the newfound determination, a looming thought surfaced. Had he really prepared them for what was next? A latent fear gnawed at him. The real test lay ahead, beyond the cacophony, and he could only hope that this wasn't just another moment of misguided bravado. The seams of understanding were ripping apart, but perhaps this could be a reformation, or a total disaster. The decision lay in the balance, teetering between discovery and danger. What awaited them on this stormy horizon could reshape everything, testing not just the systems they hovered over, but also the very foundation of his belief in himself as a leader. Would this desperate leap propel them to safety, or was it leading them to a ruin from which there would be no recovery? James's heart raced as he watched his team spring into action, fingers darting across keyboards, their faces illuminated by the glow of screens. It was a moment that teetered on the brink of everything he had aspired to in his career. Would they transform this storm into a beacon of success, or would it crush them under its weight? Mark, check the South Sector readings again. I need to ensure we're covering all bases, he instructed, the urgency of the situation sharpening his focus. His mind buzzed with possibilities, yet the shadow of self-doubt loomed. How much had he truly prepared them for this? Had years of training equipped him for leadership in crisis, or was he merely a player in an unfolding drama of chaos? You got it, Mark replied, his voice steady despite the pressure. James felt a flicker of reassurance. Trust was crucial, and with each quick nod from his team, he sensed the synergy emerge, a rhythm developing like a well-rehearsed symphony. They were moving as one, feeding off his energy, and he vowed not to squander this moment. Yet between each bursts of effort, James wrestled with the intrinsic fear that had taken root when he first assumed this role. The feeling of inadequacy crawled back into his thoughts, whispering about potential failures and buried disappointments. "Lucy, can you visualize the data? We need to see where these correlations intersect," he urged, striving to maintain momentum as the chaos fluttered around them. Her eyes sparkled with determination, and as she executed his command, the screens flickered into vibrant representations of trends and anomalies. "Got it! It connects here and here," she called out, excitement lacing her tone. James felt an electric thrill course through him at the sight of their efforts pulling together. But still, the gnawing doubts lingered, now mixed with ambition. Here lay a fleeting opportunity, not just to salvage the situation, but to redefine their future as a team. What if, he thought, we could build a model from what we learned today, one that would guide us through future crises? He shook off the notion of failure and drew in a deep, calming breath. "Let's reframe our approach. Instead of reacting, let's anticipate," he declared, his voice firm. He stood straighter, shoulders back, embodying the leadership he desperately wanted to exemplify. "Mark, enhance our response parameters. If we can predict the spikes, we might be able to control them," he commanded, his mind racing with strategies and contingencies, each one more audacious than the last. The frantic tapping filled the room as Mark adjusted the protocols, and Lucy began drawing alternative patterns as they worked in a rhythm that felt almost instinctual. James allowed himself to embrace the fear. If it motivated him to push harder, maybe it wasn't entirely negative. Suddenly a blaring alarm pierced through, yanking him from his thoughts and crashing the momentum they'd begun to build. "What's happening?" The question escaped him in a barely controlled tone. "Data spike on the north sector. Unprecedented levels," Mark reported, his voice steeped in urgency. "Can we isolate the source?" James's heart pounded, but now it was joined by a surge of purpose. "I'm on it," Lucy exclaimed, leaning toward her screen, fingers flying. James realized that every thread of tension now tethered him closer to who he was meant to be, a leader who embraced the chaos, who challenged narratives of despair with declarations of potential. In the whirlwind of the room, with every frantic keystroke, he began to see a path toward something transformative. The experience crystallized a thought in his mind. Leadership wasn't about assurance. It was about adaptability in the face of uncertainty. As Lucy's sharp eyes darted around the screen, a sudden silence fell around James. He felt acutely aware of the weight behind their collective hopes and fears. "We can't be just reactive," he realized, a revelation igniting in him. "We must be proactive." And in that moment of clarity, the raging storm outside paled against the storm brewing within him. "Keep your eyes on the data. We need to turn this into an actionable strategy," he called out, his voice steady amidst the chaos, and it was as if the air shifted with the conviction in his command. But a fresh wave of uncertainty washed over him. What if their proactive endeavors sparked a tidal wave of repercussions they weren't prepared for? As he braced for the fallout, he realized the stakes were climbing higher than he could ever have imagined. "Just remember, we can't lose sight of our core values," he emphasized, suddenly aware that their integrity would define them, regardless of the outcome. The screens pulsated with information that, while crucial, now seemed to beckon with dangers he hadn't foreseen. Had he prepared himself to confront not just the situation but the consequences that lay beyond? The journey had just begun, but the path ahead turned darker, and James felt the weight of his decisions like never before. What awaited his team in the deeper shadows might reshape their very identities, and as darkness loomed over every screen, one thought emerged, igniting a deeper fear. What if in trying to be the catalyst for change, he was leading them all down a path they might never return from? As the alarm shrieked, a sense of urgency filled the air, thick with tension and alarm. James stood unwavering, recognizing that he was not just a janitor anymore. He was at the forefront of a crisis demanding all he had. This was not merely a test of mechanical prowess. It was the ultimate challenge that called forth the leader he had yet to become. "Focus on the data," he barked, grasping at the swirling chaos around him like a lifeline. His voice garnered immediate attention. The room hung on his every word. They were no longer remnants of a distracted team. but a cohesive unit prepared to challenge uncertainty. Mark, Lucy, and the technicians around him connected the dots rapidly on their screens. James could see their growing determination mirrored in the flickering monitors, each blink a testament to their shared resolve. With every new spike and drop that flickered across their screens, he felt anchored by purpose. Adaptability. It's everything. He mused inwardly while watching Mark manipulate the control panel. Here, against the backdrop of impending failure and crystallized hope, James began to understand the very fabric of leadership. It was woven from the threads of resilience and trust, the vital currents that flowed between each member of the team. As more alarms rang, the reverberations of dread surged through him. Yet amidst the clamor, he felt an ember of confidence ignite. "Mark, ensure the backup protocols are seamless. We need to be ready for anything that comes our way." His commands flowed unhesitatingly, each word infused with newfound authority. Where once he had stood confined by an identity of insignificance, he now opened himself up to the potential within. "Lucy, reroute our primary protocols. Let's stabilize the fluctuations, now." His voice was steady, a stark contrast to the chaos that had threatened to consume them only moments before. He understood that every decision made now was not just about saving the project. It was about solidifying his own identity as someone capable of navigation in tumult. Mark's fingers danced rapidly over the buttons. Numbers began to stabilize, a flicker of relief washing over those present. James could see the flickering enthusiasm spreading, flooding the room with a sense of collaboration and mutual respect. These were peers, working in concert with him, united not in the fear of failure, but in the vast ocean of possibility that lay ahead. At that moment, a new alarm sounded, but this time it didn't trigger panic. It bolstered James's resolve. He stood resolute, embodying a calm deliberation as he scanned the screens. "We are steering this ship. Let's make sure we navigate successfully through the storm." Realizing the weight of responsibility had transformed into awareness rather than dread, James leaned into the challenge unfolding before him, pushing the boundaries he had once let confine him. They stood together on the precipice of change, ready to forge pathways not solely for crisis resolution, but for comprehensive improvement and empowerment. "Prepare for the energy release protocol," he commanded, and instead of uncertainty, he felt a thrill course through his veins, a powerful conviction resonating within him. This wasn't just a solution to a problem. It was a pivotal moment for him and his colleagues, a testament to their collective fortitude in the face of turmoil. With synchronized precision, they executed his plan. The machine responded positively, quieting the alarms whose shrill warnings had become a cacophonic backdrop to their efforts. Soon, stabilization appeared, surges checked, data plugs confirmed. "Pressure levels normalized," Mark chimed in, relief spilling through his tone. James stood taller. This was his victory, a corporeal testament to his growth. Here was stability born from collaboration, trust, and tenacity. Dr. Morales stepped forward, his previous skepticism dwindling into the background. "James, excellent work," he acknowledged, finally meeting James's gaze with respect instead of dismissal. James nodded, a smile breaking across his face, not out of vanity but pure affirmation of his journey. This recognition elevated him beyond the shadows he had inhabited for so long. This wasn't just about saving the project. It was a declaration of self-worth, a monument to potential finally summoned. As the whirlwind subsided, James felt accomplished, invigorated by a newfound identity grounded in competence. Each technician around him no longer saw just a janitor. He was their collaborator, their leader, their equal. Together, we mapped a crisis into an opportunity, he thought, a sense of pride and fulfillment washing over him. He was finally reclaiming the dream he thought lost, proving that every moment observed had been a step towards this very moment. With a spirit awakened to endless possibilities, James resolved he would share his story, inspiring others to break through whatever confines held them back. This was his narrative now, no longer just about surviving delusion, but achieving authentic transformation and the awe of self-discovery. In his heart, he knew this was not the conclusion, but the threshold of new beginnings. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. It truly makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Your thoughts matter. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share.